we'll just take a couple of minutes to consider exactly what it is that a saddle needs to deliver for both the horse and the rider.
When we look at saddles, we need to look at saddles about how come all saddles have 3 points, and how far forward should the 3 point be where the gullet plate is. Why do saddles slide forward?
What was really interesting was that we came up with 70% larger on the left at the withers, but no difference left and right at T18. What we can also do with this technology is just, rather than looking at shape, we can look at strain, and we can look to see where there are areas of high strain, which means that there is a lot of movement in that muscle.
There's a whole ecosystem involved in this, where the poor fitter is smack in the middle.
Welcome everybody. I'm Caroline Lindsay, veterinary physiotherapist, a graduate human sports therapist, a certified saddle fitter, a certified clinical educator, and I'm in my second year of PhD study and focusing on rider posture and horse performance. I'm beyond delighted and thrilled to welcome these three highly distinguished gentlemen. Dr. David Marlin is making his debut today and joins Jochen Schleese and Bradley Whale. I want to begin with a very short video to set the scene for tonight's session. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to consider exactly what it is that a saddle needs to deliver for both the horse and the rider. So you'll notice how mobile the back is. This horse is warmed up. So it took about 15 minutes to get this far. This is slow motion, obviously. So look at the shoulder movement, and you'll see on the other side of the horse that there is a hatched area. That's where I've marked the saddle, where the saddle fits. And the mark that you can see, the vertical line on the left scapula, that's where the tree points would be. So this is for the English style of fitting. So fitting the saddle tree points behind the scapula. But you can see there how close that scapula. I still, even though I've mapped it out and palpated for it, I haven't missed that scapula at all. So see how the saddle surface needs to be flat for the back, but vertical over the shoulders. So this is what we take templates of. Just another couple of minutes, a different horse, just showing you the action of the scapula. This one will show you the asymmetry of the scapulae. And I don't think this horse has been fully warmed up, so you can see how minimal the blood supply is to the muscles. You should be able to see the muscles working, contracting, relaxing. That's that film. So now we will begin this session with Dr. David Marlin. If you have any questions, just put them in the comments, and we will stop at intervals for audience participation and discussion. Right. So Dr. David Marlin is a physicist interested in both health and welfare and performance. He spent more than 20 years at the Animal Health Trust in Newmarket in the UK. David runs his own consultancy and community, online community, which is drdavidmarlin.com, but we'll put that in the replay email to you. He's a member of the Team GB Scientific Advisory Group, president of the National Equine Welfare Council, president of the Sport Horse Welfare Foundation, and an FEI climate advisor. For the past 7 years, David has been interested in the challenges of saddle design, manufacture, fit, and function. He's not a saddle fitter, but works closely with many experienced saddle fitters such as Mark Fisher. He's currently working with a company called Ergon Equine to better understand back morphology and motion with a view to designing better trees and saddles. So we're in great hands tonight with Dr. David Marlin. So I will ask you to begin and take the floor, David. It's all yours.
Thanks so much, Caroline. I'm not sure how many of you will have heard of Ergon Equine, but if you are interested, there is their website, and there's one of the quotes that it says what Ergon is about. And as I say, I've been working with Ergon for about maybe 6 years now, and certainly for me, this is a really interesting area. As Caroline said, I'm very open about the fact that I'm not a saddle maker, I'm not a saddle fitter, and I've been trying to learn a lot from people who do know about those topics. But one of the things that Ergon's been interested in and that I've been working on is understanding what I would call back morphology. So that's essentially back shape, and how this relates to how we think about, I guess, saddle fit and saddle design. And I'm sure many of you are aware, and you've probably even got these things yourself, scanners, light scanning, to be able to scan solid objects and get a file that we can manipulate. And this has been around for quite a while now. And there haven't been too many studies with scanning horses. Of course, there are some, there's a commercial system, there's Horse Shape, which is a 3D scanner for the horse's back. But there are some possible challenges in scanning horses. First of all, a long scan time. Horses don't tend to want to stand still for long times. Distance and resolution. Horses are quite big. The fact that they often do move. And one of the other big problems we have is that there's a lack of contrast in their coats. Light scanning tends to work well where you've got contrast, and often with horses we don't have that. So I played around with a lot of different systems, and the system that we settled on to do most of our scanning work up to date, at least our static scanning work, is a system called Scanet. And it works with an attachment that goes on an iPad. And on the iPad screen, it's really nice. You can see what you're actually scanning, and it shows you if you're too close or if you're too far or if you've missed areas. So you get this instant feedback. And what we can do is create nice 3D images of horses. This is from the side, and you can see this is the same image turned around, and we're looking at the top. And then we can, I'm working in a software called Mesh Mixer. I can actually cut those images, and this is now, I've thrown away the front half of the horse, and I've come round and stood where the horse's head and neck and shoulders and chest would be, and I'm looking in towards the back of the horse, and I can see the cross section of the horse. Now you might see this horse is slightly off center. The great thing about 3D scanning is that it is vertical, is always vertical, and it's also scaled as well. So we can make accurate measurements down to the millimeter off of these sort of images. So why might we be interested in this? Well, in the way that I'm sure many of you as saddle fitters would be using FlexiCurves or possibly other sort of manual templating systems, we were quite interested in being able to do this digitally and to see how reliable and repeatable it is. And then we can sort of start to look at different areas underneath the saddle, and look at different horses, look at left-right asymmetry. And as I say, here we're just looking at one example and a calculation of the angle. Now, of course, an absolute angle is not always going to be an accurate representation, especially if you're up towards the front of the horse over the withers, because we know it's not exactly straight lines. But using this type of approach, what we've done is look at some different populations of horses, and we've looked at the angles of the back, of the thorax, where the saddles sit in different places. And what you can see here are three groups. There's 21 dressage horses, 21 endurance horses, and of course those we would imagine are quite different extremes, and then another smaller group of dressage horses. And you can see that at the front, as you would expect, the angles are narrower, and there tends to be much greater variation between horses. And as we go further back, you can see, again, this is stuff I'm telling you, I'm sure you know already, but we can see that the variation gets back. So further back, the angle actually of an endurance horse isn't that different to that of a dressage horse. At the front, not surprisingly, the endurance horses tend to be fairly sort of thin Arabs. Well, these ones were elite endurance horses, and they were elite dressage horses, the blue and the orange at V1. You can see there's quite a significant difference in the angles. So again, this is a manual templating profiling system. This is the Dennis Lane system. And the reason I'm showing this is because Kevin Hausler did some work with this system. It isn't published yet, but Kevin gave me permission to show this because I've been working on this with him. And I'd be interested to know how many of you come across this system, whether it is well known, but the principle there is fairly simple. You have different templates which you place on, and you write down the number of the one that is the best fit. And this is done at these 6 positions. That's Kevin. Kevin is a vet based at Colorado State University. And say this is the Dennis Lane system. There is on the left. The red is where we've actually turned these the card numbers into actual angles. And what we've been able to do with that is compare Kevin's data to our data using 3D light scanning. And the reason why I wanted to do that is Kevin's got a huge amount of data. He's got 211 mature healthy horses without back pathology, mainly quarter horses, but a fair number of warm bloods, reasonably decent number of Morgans, and a small number of thoroughbreds. And when we look at Kevin's data I've actually got as ranges rather than the means and percentiles that you're looking at for my data. But you can see that we're pretty much in the same ballpark with Kevin's larger amount of data. So I guess in a way this would possibly be nearer to the type of, if you were to be measuring, say, with a flexi curve and looking at the angle, that would be nearer to Kevin's system than perhaps to my 3D light scanning approach. So what sort of things could we use this for? Well, Gillian Tabor and I actually did some work to try and understand, first of all, how reliable this is. And what we did is we took a group of endurance horses and we scanned them, and then we walked them around, repositioned them square again, scanned them again, and then we did that a 3rd time. There is some degree of, we would say, subjectivity in analysing these, because I don't know if you can see underneath the red circles, we have actually got markers placed on the horses as points of reference. But in terms of within Mesh Mixer, if you're making slices to then analyse, it is a little bit, it's not subjective because there are clear directions as to how to do it. But what we looked at was between observer variation. So we got different people to do the same analysis. And what we were particularly interested in was using this to be able to look at epaxial muscle volume, left versus right. And what was interesting, effectively what we're doing is drawing a line from the surface down 15 centimeters, and then we're drawing that line across horizontally, and we're looking at the left-right volume. And we found that it was actually very reliable to do this. either the same person doing it 3 times or different people. And also we didn't see much variation from scan to scan when we walked the horses round and repositioned them. What was really interesting was that we came up with 70% larger on the left at the withers, but no difference left and right at T18. And if you are interested in that, as I say, that paper is published. If you can't get hold of a copy, then it's something that interests you, do let me know. But it's certainly a technique that we want to do some more work with. And of course, you don't have to really these days have fancy equipment. This is an app called Scandi Pro, which we have done some work with. It's sometimes better with some horses than others in different lighting. It's not ideal, but of course these apps are improving all the time. And this, as I say, is a scan of a horse that I took. So essentially, I'm looking at using light scanning technology to understand variation between horses in back shape and how that back shape changes as you move from the front of where the saddle would sit towards the back. And that's really my first introduction on static.
I've just got one question. How do you ensure that you get the same templating position each time? Do you just shave a little bit of the coat off at that particular DSP, or?
No, this is we're putting on the type of spheres that we would use in kinematic analysis. So we're putting those on. So we're in that case, there was a marker at T18 and then one over the center of the scapula. So we don't take them off. We're walking the horse around and they're still in the same place. Now that would of course add in potentially another variable if you were taking them on and off each time. Okay.
I was just thinking there of saddle fitters and riders, owners who may do their own templating, but obviously they'd have to get it in the same position each time.
Yeah.
Okay. We have no questions from the audience yet. So Jochen, Bradley, would you like to ask or make a point?
Yeah, I have a question, David. You said you're using a program called Mesh Mixer to get the cross section. How far are you able? How quick are you able to get the measurements after you took the scan?
Very quick. The way ScanX works is you have the iPad with the camera on, and that is actually not saving any data. It's streaming the images to your laptop, and then the file can be processed within a sort of a minute, and then you could open it immediately in Mesh Mixer. So it is possible to do it within a few minutes of scanning.
Yeah, that's fantastic. As you mentioned, the Scandi Pro or the Horse Shape Pro, they are giving you that as well, but they don't give you the measurement right away. I mean,
right.
Every business has an angle how they make money, and for the consumer, the rider or the saddle fitter, there's nothing, from my point, more accurate than the scanning. I'm visualizing if I would be the rider, how would that help me if my saddle fitter comes at that moment, and how would the saddle fitter take that information, even like you said, to the millimeter, very exact measurements, and apply it to the saddle?
I think I'd probably ask you that question, but I think Caroline made a good point there. You know, at this stage, I would not know how to probably standardize these images, because when we're doing the scans, we'd locate T18, and then we'd probably have, well, we'd have 3 of us doing it and agree on where it was. So whether owners could be, probably not, I would say, because, you know, it is a skill. So really the question is, how do you identify the same point on the horse each time? For example, if the owner was going to scan the horse each month and send you a scan to decide whether they need to come and have their saddle refitted, there's the issue of, are they standing the horse up correctly? Is the head slightly to the left or right? Interestingly, head position doesn't make a massive difference as long as it's not ridiculously round. But I think the issue with the 3D is standardization. Yeah. Whereas obviously you, as an experienced saddle fitters, you are palpating and locating the anatomical landmarks, which isn't so easy to see when you're looking at a 3D scan. So I think there's some challenges to overcome in non-professionals using it, but I think long term, I suspect it will come to that.
Fantastic. I started working with that scanning system in the 90s with a gentleman in Germany. His name is Christopher Rieser. He looks like your typical inventor. He's a goldsmith by trade, and then he became a master saddler, focused mainly on Western. And I have a couple slides from his fitting technology or fitting tools. And then his nephew came up with a horse shape. And it was in the beginning where we had this computer on the back and then big box. You had to hold it over the horse and you had to put markers on and the horse moved around. What a nightmare. But it's like you said, things evolved so fast. So I was always fascinating and always was wondering, how will that help the customer and the saddle fitter on site to make these images now and now apply them to fit the saddle? That is really kind of the missing link we're all looking for.
Yeah, I think at this stage, I see it would reach more check-in potentially before it reaches users being able to fit. I don't think they ever can for reasons I might discuss later.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Great. Bradley, anything to add?
There you go. Yeah, most people kind of know my view and opinion on how I do stuff. I'm a massive lover of maths rather than necessarily scanning technology, because fundamentally, like what everyone's discussed, David, Jochen, and everybody is trying to put it into context. You know, there's no landmarks, there's no kind of easy ways of location. Whilst if you use mathematics of bony endpoints, it becomes a hell of a lot easier because then you can use a lot of maths and geometry. So yeah, I'm anybody who wants to talk to me about the maths and various things like that, you know, that's where I definitely think a lot of the where you'll be able to pull a lot of the context in. But we just need kind of uniformity in terms of kind of the maths is the most polite way of describing it. But yeah, it's an interesting topic in terms of scanning technology and how viable it is. It's also depending on the viability for who. You know, we're talking a lot about saddle fitters, which is great and fantastic, but also we have to consider customers and then manufacturers. And if you're wanting to utilize scanning technology for manufacturers, then that means the whole manufacturing methodology has to completely change. You've suddenly got traditional tree makers using wood and using it and molding a tree to a form. And then all of a sudden, now you're introducing scanning technology and measurements and all of that type of stuff. The whole manufacturing methodology has to completely adjust and change, which is a huge amount of investment, a huge amount of money, and there's kind of various things like that. So, you know, it's not just as simple as introduce one kind of piece of technology and suddenly it's going to change everything. It becomes quite difficult because there's a whole ecosystem within the saddle industry which has to completely change and adjust, which can be done. You know, everything can be done. It's not difficult. It's whether, you know, the industry wants it and the industry is willing to do it. But that's only going to happen with, and I'm going to be ringing that bell, it comes down to legislation. It comes down to protection. So yeah, it's as simple as that, really. That's the only thing which is ever actually going to make people do stuff. So yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Well, Caroline's just wandered off. That's lovely.
My computer just went dark. I hadn't.
Oh, right, okay. I was like, am I that boring already?
Right. We have a comment from Maria Howring, saddle manufacturer designer, Ergo2X of Sweden, who has been on our summit before on the panel. She says, great base, David. And a great point, I think it was what Jochen made, that the speed of making the data useful is absolute key. What we really need is for owners to give us measures so we know if we need to alter the saddle. And would the German company offer statistics for research and standardization? Getting very technical here, but yes, that's perhaps the way round we should be doing it. Is the owners, riders need to know about this technology, how to use it, and the application is, hey, saddle fitter, my saddle needs attention from you. So some great points there. Okay, so we'll move on to Jochen's presentation. Jochen Schleese is a German certified master saddler, a certified equine ergonomist, a former internationally ranked 3-day event rider, a published best-selling author. Jochen has helped over 260,000 horses worldwide in the past 44 years of his saddle making, saddle fitting, saddle retailing career. He's a guest speaker at many universities and equine trade fairs and symposiums and summits. He is founder of 9 equestrian-related companies and academies. He manufactures riding saddles for all disciplines and levels, sold worldwide, and is an international patent holder or patent, depending where you are. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal in the USA and twice on the Discovery Channel on TV. Jochen is a recipient of numerous industry and business awards and accolades. Off you go, Jochen.
Thank you very much. Read it so beautiful. Thank you very much for having me part of this summit. And I'd like to start. You mentioned on your Facebook post how reliable is templating. And so I think the tools are today's, like David already says, advance rapidly. The question is how and where to measure. I think it's easy if there is kind of guidelines and we all find it logical. But again, the difficult part for the consumer, for the manufacturer, for the saddle fitter is how we apply it. I think that's where the key element or the key issue is. So these images are quite old. This is from the University of Zurich. Saddle fitting is a problem, and they're trying to find out, and why are we seeing so often white hair in the front and the back and shearing skin atrophy, dry spots. So the industry definitely is working very fast on this and in all levels. And also high-tech tools are available now for the clients to see if a proper application of the measurements is made. There is pressure mats, many of those. Some of them are of cloth, some of them leather, some have wither contour. They have location markers now, so you know exactly where what is. And they record movement of the rider. So it's a great for research. It's great for testing. So as I said, the tools advanced. Thermography being around the industry for a long time. They have made huge advances on that. And we see often a lot of pressure in the front due to the different angles and shear factor of the front underneath the saddle, of course. And we see a lot of bridging and also a lot of issue in the lumbar area. And a very simple tool from Canada, it's a gel pad. You ride with 15 minutes. And then when you finish riding, you want a nice even contour. Or you see something like this where all that has been pressured away. Very interesting when you play with different flocking materials, different thicknesses, etc. And of course, from France, what comes, it's an app. And it's kind of, I call it the Apple Watch of the questions, where you have heart rate, calorie burn, left, right gait analysis, cadence. So it makes it pretty simple. But I like to back up a little bit, because we do need to remember we have a lot of adult amateur riders who starts riding late, and they have the passion, they have the money, and they now have to listen to the experts. And I always like to say we need to think about these animals are not meant to carry weight or humans. Yes, we sit on these animals for many, many thousands of years, but the majority of them like to live in the herd. In the wild, they move 20 miles in 17 hours. Head is down, and they're grazing with one leg forward. Xenophon was one of the first military officer who wrote down on paper for a soldier how to properly train the horse for them to be sustainable and last. Today we have scientists, we have all kinds of articles written, and we pretty much can agree that the horse's spine has 32 growth plates, and they do not finish until they're 6.5. And in many industries, sad to say, they start at way too early, riding the horse way too heavy, lack of words here, and where the muscle haven't built strong enough, the proper muscle hasn't built strong enough that the ligaments and joints will give out. Many horses in the hunter-jumper world or eventers come from the racetrack. This is one industry where the horse starts very early. And in his philosophy is that we got to get the horses to get strong. The horse's back needs to develop, the haunches need to come underneath, and then the horse can go longer distance, jump higher fences, go higher in dressage. Now, we all heard this before. Muscle disappears 4 times faster than it appears. Unfortunately, opposite with body fat. And when I speak to trainers, they barely go away on holidays, because they know when they stop training, the muscles go back to be like you see on the left. The horse wants to be on the forehand. If you look at the skeleton on the horse, Xenophon explained we need to protect these horses forehand, and we all learned in Pony Club we got to ride the horse off the forehand, not on the forehand. So through all my years of travel, I always come across people understand this, and yet I have not heard people be very proud. Says, "Oh yeah, I ride very hard upside down, and I ride hard on the forehand." I haven't heard yet, and that would make no sense. So if we understand we need to train the horse to go to a higher level, then we also know there are changes in the horse. So I think what the rider demands from the saddle fitter in the industry is that we as saddle fitters, saddle makers trying to make saddles, and we trying to align 2 beams. And there's a vertical and horizontal spine, and we want to avoid long-term damage, which is caused by ill-fitting saddles. This is what my most advanced horse I had in my riding careers, and I had big expectation to ride in the '84 Olympics, and we could not find the occasional symptomatic lameness on this horse. I mean, we had top people. I was sponsored, we had saddle fitters, we had vets, body workers galore. And back then, we're talking about in the late 70s, early 80s, we could not find the problem. Only years later, through research, you can see now explained that poor saddle fit can cause these occasional symptomatic lameness. So when we look at saddles, we need to look at saddles and how come all saddles have 3 points? And how far forward should the tree point be where the gullet plate is? Why do saddles slide forward? So when saddles get made or get fitted, I think we can pretty much all agree that the riders would like to have a horse where the horse has nice shoulder freedom, wither clearance with withers, not just on the top, also on the side. It should not sit on the spine, and the saddle length, etc. There's multiple aspects which we kind of agree. The question now is, what are all these lines on the horse? Why should we measure over line 1, and why should we not measure over line 1? Where should we measure directly behind the shoulder, or like Caroline showed, she called it the English saddle fitting, a couple centimeters back? What is line 3, and so on and so forth. So as in other summits or other discussion, we can see that the horse's spine has different width, and we can pretty much look at underneath every saddle. There is a space, we call it the gullet. Now, in some saddles wider, as saddles narrow, but you will never find an army saddle or packing saddle, or you would never find a Western saddle where the bars a minimum of 10 centimeter wide. Yes, the leather in the sheepskin comes all the way to the middle, but you will never see super narrow gullets. And yes, many discussions have been done and said, well, if I make the gullet wider, then the tree falls through. So there is this very tricky challenge. How can we give the horse the spinal clearance it needs without creating massive pinpoint pressure? Very good video from the Spanish riding school, where one of their saddle fitter talks about how important it is to make sure that the rider does not sit too far back, where we want to locate them. This here is, let me just stop it when it comes to the side. Here we go. Like a saddle stand, and we can look at it. Where do we want to have the saddle sitting? Most people know the term pinching the withers. David just talked about the T18, how far and how long can the saddle go back? And then, of course, when we look at the spinal clearance, how wide should it really be? What is realistic? As I was saying, the main job for the rider is to bring the horses back up, enabling the horses, engage their hindquarters properly. This will allow the horse to carry the rider and themselves on their hind legs to protect the delicate joints and ligaments and tendons on the front legs. This is done at UC Davis, where they simulate when the horse's back come up. You can see that the spinal processes are separating. So if I ride upside down, means the bottom muscle gets thicker, the horse lands super hard on the forehand, and of course the curvature where the saddle sits looks different than if the horse is ridden the way we desire to get the way off the forehand. That makes, of course, a massive difference, and that comes later in my second spiel when we talk about the dynamic fitting. But obviously, saddle fitters have to look, how is this person riding the horse? Do they ride him upside down? Then we need to make a judgment call. As I was mentioning earlier, there's many different fitting tools these days. You know, you can measure the top line, different devices, either with a FlexiCurve or with one of these devices. It's very popular in Germany. This device here, I find it very easy to use, has 11 joints, has levels on the back and on the top. I apologize, the not so clear picture. So it's easy for the saddle fitter to put this on and put the saddle on top, or put the saddle this inside the saddle. So there's different ways how to make or measure the curvature the horses have and change. This is the device. This is from an English saddle maker, David Foster, came up with this years ago from this idea here. So as I was mentioning, saddle fitting devices or measuring devices have really advanced over the last 40 years. This is the tool from Christopher Reza. I mentioned him. I call him the saddle geek. He's like super, he reminds me a lot of you, Bradley. He's all about numbers. And he came up with the topographer. This is his way of measuring. And he has the CNC machine, and he phrases out the trees towards this back. And of course, like David already mentioned, the horse scanner, that came a long way, because it is now easy for literally anybody to do this, because this phone will hum, and when you're in the right height, it will stop, and then it beeps. It goes very fast. And the advantages, it gives you a very clear image of the horse's back, and the customer can do it. You can put all kinds of markers on. And what I like about David's, I think it calls a Scanet, that you can go instantly and get the measurement from the cross section. What we kind of missing here from a saddle fitting point of view, they are sending you a couple of days later the cutouts, which you can then put on the inside the saddle. And keep in mind, this is all static. We haven't measured the moving horse yet inside the saddle, and you can put it onside the horse's back. So it's a great device, and it's, I think, also one product of the year in Equitana last year, and gives the customer a very good visual. My horse's back changed, I better call my saddle fitter. Or there's many chiropractors, physiotherapists, massage therapists, osteopath who say, yeah, I can adjust your horse and then he will be absolutely even. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. Not that I'm an osteopath or chiropractor, but many times we as saddle makers or saddle fitters or riders have to rely on professionals, and we kind of believe them. This kind of a system is very good for them to show, because not every adult amateur rider sees what they're talking about. So it's a very nice device. Applications, there are now computerized saddle rebuilding machines, for lack of words. So they are all motorized, and they're set to the machine the scanner reads. Or this is the beanbag. You can form it by hand, or you put this cardboard tracing out, or you put the arc device in, or you put the saddle in and then scan it, compare how would that fit the horse. There's many, many very cool tools out now on the market for pretty much anybody to use. The main question is, why should we measure and where should we measure? So this is the end of my first presentation, and I'm looking forward to your questions and, of course, to Bradley's presentation.
I'd like to say, first of all, there are no questions from the audience yet, but I'm sure this will come up later and you've probably got some slides on it, but is part of the measuring protocol also being able to assess the function of the back, what you see? So it's all very well coming along with all this really exciting technology, and it is very useful, but I wouldn't like to think that just because we've got an accurate measurement of the horse's back, that the horse should have a saddle fitted to it at that time.
So what are you really asking me? You're asking me, do we measure the horse and then the saddle fitter walks away until Bradley fixes the horse? Or what are you saying?
I think, yes, that when you've got your measurements, you then need an assessment of the posture, the muscle development, the capability of carrying a rider. Just saying. Yeah.
So how reliable are the templates is the topic. And I wanted to share with you and with your audience what's all available. I'm all excited after I saw David scan it, how fast you get actual measurement, because with other tools you're waiting. Okay, so you can show the customer very quick there, and then it's up to the customer who says, yeah, you know, even though I have a big competition coming up, or I'm a pleasure rider, I'm going to wait. Weather's finally good, I can ride, I'm going to wait and fix my horse first. Reality is, and you as a physiotherapist, I believe you've been through that many times. You tell the horse owner, this horse needs 6 weeks of rehab. And they do it for 3 to 4, and then they look how this horse is farting around and jumps around the field, and look how good it is. Oh, you know what? I'm going to put the saddle on. And off they go.
Yeah.
And the saddle fitter has done anything, walked away. Now the saddle fitter comes and says, who just looked at the saddle? So-and-so. They're not going to say they didn't do anything. So-and-so is the idiot who didn't fit that saddle. So the saddle fitter, and I think this is very important to you from what I understand, you kind of want to protect the saddle fitter, give them a little bit more, lack of words, tools. But we also need to have a reality check here. Riding is so expensive, and people want to ride, and everybody wants an Advil or an aspirin. Nobody wants to do the work to it, so I don't get a headache. So I want the fast fixes. So as a consumer, you have all these professionals around you. The question then goes back to the consumer. What do you like to do? The way that horse is built today is X, Y, Z. And as Xenophon explained, and we all desire to ride off the forehand. How many people really ride off the forehand? Like when you watch this, how many people really are able, physical, talent, have the instruction, or the horse is able? So I think a good saddle fitter most of the time has a lot of biomechanic knowledge, is a rider, and has then to assess this horse is lame, cannot and should not be ridden.
Yeah.
For this horse, well, like what did Sue Dyson in one of her articles said? Over 74% of the horses in the studies were clinical lame, but still be ridden. Anyway, I don't want to ramble on, and this is a topic which is huge. Yeah. But in terms of reliable templates, the industry marches in record speed forward. Yeah. And if you have a base, from there goes what you just said. What am I doing now? And as I said in my first slide, how to apply it. That is the difficulty.
Exactly. Thank you. Any questions before we move on to Bradley's session? There's nothing from the audience. They are mesmerized. Okay, well, let's move on to Bradley, who has a very short biog here. He's just very, very nerdy. Seems to have the answer to everything. That's why we keep inviting him back. And he's a registered human osteopath, but he treats horses too. He's the inventor of Ipatan saddles and a father of 2 kids, one which is only 6 weeks old. Over to you, Bradley.
Right then. So it's always fascinating, basically, when we get given a question like this. Because I've looked at it from a very, very different angle, which is always quite fascinating. So yeah, it's quite interesting that I've looked at this basically slightly differently than both David and Jochen, because obviously they're looking at machines and various tools involved, and I've basically gone kind of a bit more left field, really. Who gets to fit? Basically, we fit either the customer, rehabilitation. Who are you fitting for? Basically, manufacturers, researchers, competitors. They all have very different requirements in terms of the fitting process. And if they have different requirements for the fitting process, therefore, they will need different methodologies, which goes into where David and Jochen are talking about different templating tools and various things like that. You may want to use a scanner for a competitor rider, but a manufacturer may turn around and go, they don't have the facilities or the ability to use a scanning tool, whilst a simple flexi curve for a happy hack is more than enough. So this is where actually you're kind of putting the fitter in a situation of having to choose what tool is best. Now, basically, most tools come down to 2 or 3 things: flexi curves or scanners. But fundamentally, behind it all is all mathematics. And this is where I come into it, because I'm a massive nerd, despite me being an osteopath. So my thing is very much that maths is the most important thing here. The best procedures in anything is generally mathematics heavy. Now, what we mean by that, that doesn't mean that the fitter has to do the maths. It doesn't mean, it means that kind of the manufacturer could do the maths, or you can do the maths later on. But the whole point is that you can take objective measurements. And when we say objective measurements, from Ipertan's perspective, that means bony measurements, because you can always locate where a bone is. So you can always find the highest point of the wither. You can always find the highest point of the bum. You can always find the 18th rib. Notice I say the 18th rib. I don't say T18, because as David has very kindly mentioned, T18 is a bit of a bugger to find. Pardon my language, sorry. But rib 18, most people can find. Now, the reasons why I like maths is because it's unbiased. You can't lie. If that's the number which you're getting, it might be incorrect, but that's the number you're getting. And therefore, there can be a procedure in order to improve that process. It also gives a good way of accountability. If there is a problem, we can all basically be adults and turn around and go, right, whose fault is it? Manufacturer's fault, customers, or the fitter's fault. So you can basically work backwards. The beauty about flexicurves, which is why we all use them as saddle fitters, is because they're cheap and they're universally accepted. Scanners are fantastic, but you've got to have very specialist companies which use them, like David's Ergon Saddlery. You know, that's a company which is actually forging ahead and using a scanning technique in order to help potentially build and manufacture their saddles. Absolutely fantastic. The difficulty may lie is that if something comes along and supersedes it, and then they've got to change their whole manufacturing methodology, which is why a lot of manufacturers kind of stick back to the old methodology of flexicurves, because it's been tried, trusted, and delivered. The difficulty is that because of flexicurves and scanners, there is no universal method. And because different companies use different methodologies of manufacture and different methodologies of testing and fitting and so on and so forth, it creates this kind of weird dynamic where the poor fitter is having to figure out what methodology is best for the products, not only best for the horse. And there's a whole legislative issue going on as well, because certain saddlers and saddle companies, they push fitters to only supply one brand or two brands and so on and so forth. So there's a whole ecosystem involved in this, where the poor fitter is smack in the middle, having to deal not only with the manufacturing demands and how the individual manufacturing company expressly say, right, this is what you're supposed to do for our product. And I'll, later on, I'm actually going to talk about psychology. So this is where it gets quite fascinating, because everyone's talking about obviously saddle fit, and I'm sat there going, well, actually, let's look at the psychology of this, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So what I'm actually also going to do is give you a little bit of a sneak peek of Ipertain's measuring process. So you all know that I'm a bit of a nerd, and obviously I love objectivity. So what we do is basically we take the first measurement, which is from the wither height to the bum height. So actually, it's easier if I show you an image. So you can basically see, if we take the measurement from the top of the wither to the bum, and we know the bum height and the wither height, we've now created essentially a big giant square. Now that's either quite horizontal on top, or there might be an incline or a decline if the bum's high or the wither's high. And we can work that out. We can basically put that into a very complicated algorithm. And then what we do is we then find the lowest point in the wither, so obviously the curve. And then from that lowest point, we can then work out how the angles from T12, T13, which is generally the base of the wither, and we can work out those angles, both in front and behind. And obviously then what we do is we build our saddle off those angles and off those measurements. But this is where it gets quite fun. with greater accuracy, can we actually tolerate? Can the product tolerate? Because what you've got to do, if you've taken all those measurements, you've then got to allow basically for tolerances. And the problem is that because we are using systems to accurately measure the horse, that inherently means that the accuracy of the product is going to increase as well. Now, if the product is becoming more and more accurate, its tolerances for variation reduce. And that's the natural incline of becoming more accurate products. You very rarely create an accurate product which then has greater degrees of variance and variation. So we've also got to understand that if we are, as fitters, as customers, as manufacturers, demanding more and more accuracy, then we are also then perpetuating a continual conundrum between making an accurate product and having accuracy readings. That means the poor customer, somebody's going to lose out. That means we have to, if the horse then changes shape and various things like that, we basically then means that the customer is having to buy another product because it's so accurate. It's almost too accurate. And this is something which we see. Now, as I say, and Caroline very kindly kind of touched very lightly on it in terms of if quantitative information is queen, which we all agree, quantitative information, so the empirical methodology is very, very good, then context is king. And always putting it into context. Now that's where the fitter really comes into their own. That is what the fitter is great at, is putting it all into context. You know, you've really got to understand the role of the fitter is putting all of that quantitative information into that kind of context of going, right, this horse is a competitive horse, or it's a happy hacking horse. This person only rides 2 days a week, or it rides 6 days a week, and so on and so forth. So then obviously it's picking and choosing the right materials and the right kind of forces applied to that horse. But as what David touched on very, very lightly, quantitative information can be hugely beneficial. But where does data collection begin and where does it end? Jochen's touched a system which basically measures the horse's heart rate, temperature, so on and so forth. You can also then become data blind. You can over analyze. So this is where the context is really, really important for us. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of we do quite a lot of private research, and this is going to be great fun for you guys. And this is a little bit old from our perspective, but we do lots and lots of micro pilot studies. So they're never big data. There's never anything like that. We kind of go off, and then if it is interesting, we then go in a little bit further. But we are wanting to ask the question: does the angle of the floor affect the angles and the measurements taken of a horse's back? Now, this was done on a static horse. Or horses, should I say. This was never done in a dynamic situation or a dynamic position. Okay, so we just wanted to know, does the angle of the floor, okay, change the shape and the angles of the horse's back? So our methodology was very simple. We collected measurements from the horses from 3 perspectives. Neutral ground, 0, which was measured using an inclinometer. Front end elevated with chest higher than the rear of 1 degree. 1 degree. Okay, it's really, really simple. I just wanted to kind of see. You wouldn't think that a 1 degree is actually make that much of a difference, but we wanted to see. Third measurement was taken rear end elevation. So the bum was higher than the front end. Each position, we used a Wintec gullet bar gauge. We didn't use a flexi curve because flexi curves create too many variables, such as the pressure which you use on a flexi curve when you're pressing it into the horse's back. That's not consistent. There's also speculation in terms of the height of the fitter putting it on as well. That also has an influence upon the flexi curve. So we didn't want to play with that. We didn't want to add in that factor. We just wanted to use something really, really simple, which was a WinTech gullet bar gauge. Really, really simple. And then what we took were inclinometer readings. So this is where you have your little angle reader of the front and the rear thoracic spine. So both before and after T12, T13. So this is of horse number 2. So we took basically little pen drawings of the horse's wither. So it's obviously, this isn't their wither. This is the gullet bar. So we're not actually interested in the shape of the wither. What we're looking at more is there a change in terms of the horses wither potentially getting wider and bigger with a WinTech gullet bar gauge? And what we found was quite interesting. So green is the neutral, blue is the rear, so where the bum was higher, purple was where the front end was elevated, and orange, awkwardly enough, was the next size in gullet bar. Because obviously the WinTech, if you've any used the WinTech gullet bar, it's got the different colours on the side. Now, I'm sorry, but I've had to blank out the corner of it because that had some of our IP calculations on it, because I wrote it on the actual thing. Now, what you can see there is a 3 centimetre width variation, which is quite massive, from neutral all the way up to front end elevated on a 1 degree elevation. Okay. Longitudinal results. Now I'm briefly going through this. We have loads of studies like this, but I'm trying to keep it relatively short. So what we have in longitudinal results, horses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I won't talk you through all of that, but what's interesting is that there is an average front end wither change of 3.8 and an average lower thoracic change of 5.2 degrees, which is quite fascinating. So even a degree change on the floor, which most people can't tell, has an impact upon the shape of the horse's back. Now, the reasons why this is important is that because most humans do not notice a minute floor angle change. It also means is the proportional change in longitudinal angle in both upper and lower thoracic zones was not observed. Okay, so there is no proportional change. And that could have been because of the pool of horses which we've used. We tried to use a variety of horses in our pilot study, from very fit and athletic to quite unhealthy and so on and so forth. But we found no proportional change. That might be true if you start looking at a bigger pool with a much more consistent kind of fitness level and muscle density. We are doing further tests, so we're playing around with that research a lot more because it's quite interesting from our mathematics perspective. But the reasons why it's relevant for a fitter: where does saddle fitting actually take place? It takes place on a variety of different surfaces. It takes place in stables. We all turn around and have this purist idea that we kind of do it on a lovely flat surface. The reality is, you're doing it in a wash bay. You're doing it in an arena. You're doing it sometimes in a paddock with other horses moving around. You're doing it in stables. Like your reality, you have this lovely perception, but actual reality is you're just there. And it might be that you're fitting the horse and the floor's unlevel. Now, this is why we do kind of really mundane stuff like this, because fundamentally, if we haven't researched the fundamentals, the real basics, we're setting up people, we're setting up companies to fail, we're setting up fitters to fail, we're setting up products to fail. Because if you suddenly fit a horse and you're measuring it on the wash bay, and all of a sudden that horse is now doing exercise and everything like that, and it comes and it's moved yards, and now the yard is nice and flat, and you fit the saddle again, all of a sudden it doesn't fit anymore. That sometimes may not actually have anything to do with the fitter, but that can actually have an impact upon the product in terms of that's not your fault. That's just because of the angle of the floor. The other reasons why it's also interesting is it's quite a concern that in a lot of research, we don't take something as simplistic as the angle of the floor into account, and it does then pull into question subsequent research, because if we have indicated through a very simplistic pilot study the angle of the floor of 1 degree, okay, and 1 degree over a kind of long plinth of concrete, which was ended up, you know, a 1 degree change, it's all levers and leverage, is quite large. That could have massive impacts in terms of the modern research coming out, that we're just not taking into consideration the floor. And it's so simplistic, but this is the things we need to do. In some regards, we need to just go back to the fundamentals. We need to go back to the basics and actually question the basics, the very fundamentals of what we do. So yeah, this is, I've overrun a little bit, so I don't want to kind of hog up any more time. But the next part is where I'm going to talk about things like psychology of how we assimilate information, which is quite interesting, which we have to all take into consideration when we're talking about fitting. So yeah, I'm going to leave it relatively there, because I don't want to take up any more time.
Well, follow that, as they say. Taking from that, I think it's the same as in any technologies and research investigation, that the fitter or the owner does need to, as far as possible, measure the horse in the same place every time. If they've moved yards, then this is why they need regular fitting checks.
Yeah. But
we do need to keep the horse in the same place for all types of measurements. A couple of comments and questions here from Maria Howring. So could we use statics to prove that the measure at the base of the withers is not healthy, and then no one fits a saddle? I find that certain ratio shows a problem. Perhaps the more measuring we do, the less comfortable we are with supplying a saddle. I think that's what Maria is saying. Does anyone want to quickly, in a nutshell, contribute to that? No. And another, yeah.
I try to. Yes, as I mentioned before, at what stage do we leave the customer behind? And if you go with the statistic, what I was quoting from Sue Dyson, you know, that would be 10 customer call us out and 2 we only help, right? So interesting, Bradley, as always, and to see how much it changes when the floor changed. And can I go on with a different question? Yes. So at what stage, FlexiCurve, laser, whatever tools, is a saddle fitters, and he or she may not have the qualification as Bradley as an osteopath, or you as a physiotherapist, you know, so most of them, they don't have that kind of a knowledge. Do saddle fitters do need a science degree in order to make this, and says, okay, I'm walking away from that horse because it has a damage with us. So like Bradley says, you need to look for who do we fit. There's all these people, you know, from manufacturers to riders to owners. Anyway, so I
okay. Yeah, no, we've definitely got to think about this. It doesn't end with the technology. I think in a lot of cases it starts with the technology. Okay, so is the wither height actually a reliable place to measure, considering how much a horse can lift and lower the thorax between the scapulae? I think that might be dealt with a bit later with the dynamic fit, if David wants to answer that. No, okay. And I very much appreciate your point about measuring systems becoming too accurate. This is something I've frequently puzzled over. And back to Maria Howring, thanks, Bradley. This is the same differences we often get from measuring after riding. It comes down to knowing and checking how the saddle and the horse behaves. So definitely lots to think about there. So if there's no other questions, comments from our panel, shall we go back to David for the second part of his slideshow?
Okay, thanks so much, Caroline. Okay, so the first part, I was focusing very much on static fit, which is, or static back morphology, which I understand from a saddle fitter is probably the starting point. But of course, as the horse moves, everything changes. And I guess from what I've learned and heard and thought about, that the holy grail really of saddle design and saddle fit is to have something that would allow the horse a high degree of back motion, perhaps as close to possible as unridden as it can be, and to also have even distribution of force under that saddle. And of course, those things are generally competing. If we have a flexible saddle, it won't normally be able to dissipate force very well, spread force. If it's stiff, it dissipates force better, but may well not allow the horse's back to move. So I think in order to understand or to help fitting, to help saddle design and manufacture, we need to understand how the back moves during exercise. And well, we know we've got plenty of research. We know that the back we've got extension flexion, we've got lateral bending, we've got axial rotation. But this essentially all of our knowledge really, I would say, about how the back moves during exercise is related to how the skeleton moves. And this is just summarized from a couple of the Swedish papers on movement within the thoracic spine. We know what happens. The problem is that the skeleton is covered by a huge amount of muscle that is much harder to understand how that muscle moves. So what we did a few years ago with the group at Rutgers University was to use a technique which is actually called 4D video to capture shape dynamically. Now, in order to do this, we had, as you can see, we painted the horse to increase the contrast. We used four different video cameras, which are taking 60 frames a second. And you can see that's bottom left there, the cameras are circled and they're slightly at different positions. And we have to use bright lights in order that we don't get anything blurred. And so effectively what we're trying to do is those normal light scanning systems are recording maybe 10 frames a second. If you're lucky, that's not enough to freeze what's going on a horse's back during exercise. Now, what I can just play you this short video, and this is one of the horses galloping, and as I say, this camera is capturing 60 frames per second, so we're getting probably 30 frames per stride, 120 strides per minute, and each of these cameras generates an image. And here you can see the view. This is actually slightly slowed down. You can see the image from each camera is a slightly different position. Now, what the trick is in processing these to actually track pixels. And if we're able to track the pixels, we can take these different frames and we can look at them together. Now, this is an unstabilized view. Now, what that means is we're looking here. Initially, we were looking at the movement of the horse. But what we're able to do is to track pixels from the starting point. And we are able to look at, we're able to see not the movement of the horse in space, but the movement of the back relative to the starting position. Now, we're able to then put these images together, and we're able to produce a stabilized image of how the horse's back is changing shape. Now, that's the initial technology. It requires quite a lot of processing power. It takes a few hours to process these, but you can probably see quite nicely there some of the changes in musculature. What we can also do with this technology is just, rather than looking at shape, we can look at strain, and we can look to see where there are areas of high strain, which means that there is a lot of movement in that muscle. Now, that's the dynamic stuff, which is it's great, but there's a lot we can do if we start taking these individual scanned images. So we're taking, as I say, 60 scans a second, and we can put all these scans together, and then we can start doing clever things, I think, such as we can look at the range of motion at different points in the back. And this corresponds to what we know from biomechanics studies of the spine. So that's a good check for us. But what we can also do is, in the same way that we can cut those images and look at them statically, we can cut them and look at them dynamically. Now, this is an unstabilized set of images for one stride of walk, and that is showing how the horse is actually moving in space. What we want to do is take out the horse movement and look at how the actual back is changing shape, and that's what we see here once we've done the stabilization process. And again, because this is all scaled data, all scaled images, we can actually make measurements on there and measure absolute distances in terms of how much the musculature is changing in thickness at different points. We can also look over the course of a stride and see how that shape is changing. The red is the initial, that is the initial frame where the stride starts, and then the blues are looking at how that is changing over time. So we can see where we have got expansion. Interestingly, what we don't tend to see is that there is a reduction in muscle volume. It actually tends to be either stays the same or we get expansion. And again, these are the strain maps. We can do these for different gaits. This potentially would help us in understanding where would be good areas to load the back, and where would be potentially bad areas to load the back. And we can also take these frames. I've used a technique here where we look at what's called aspect ratio. So, for example, if something is square, it will appear a very light pink. So here we have some squares which are, they are square. It means they've got an aspect ratio that each side is the same length. But if they are quite long and stretched, then they're going to be dark red, as you can see here. And what this type of analysis helps us to do is to understand where there is a lot of movement. And it actually also allows us to pick out, for example, the back muscles. So we can see that this is changing throughout the stride, and we can actually identify the thoracic trapezius there, longissimus dorsi, latissimus dorsi. So it's really useful for us to be able to see, you can see again there, where the difference in the shape of the horse is changing. This is obviously muscle, not bone. And of course, what was interesting for us is we tried to image the movement of the shoulder. This was some work that Sean Lawson and I did. One of the problems with tracking horses is that you make the assumption that if we put a marker there, that marker is not going to move very much due to skin or muscle movement. On the lower limb, we don't really have a problem. In other points on the horse, like on the pole, we don't have a problem. But we do have a problem with the mobility of the scapula. So what we actually used was a different technique where, instead of trying to put markers on the scapular spine and track that, which is impossible. We actually put a matrix of markers, and we looked at the disturbance of the markers to track where the scapular spine was moving in 3 dimensions. And as I say, this is quite a complex figure if you're not used to looking at these sort of figures. But essentially, what we've done is normalize to a stride. And if we take the top one, which is probably the easiest, this is the dorsoventral, the up and down movement throughout the stride at walk and trot of the scapula from this sort of point here. Now, what was interesting for us was that we're actually able to see underneath the, well, in this image, if we actually put a composite together of all these frames, we can actually start to see where the scapula is moving, and we have walk, trot, canter, gallop. So for me, I think being able to look at these things dynamically, particularly for us to be able to look at muscle, is really important in understanding how we might develop better saddles and understanding some of the problems that do occur with conventional saddles. Hopefully I was in time.
Just wow. I'm so pleased to see that level of technology coming out. Really, really am. A couple of comments from Maria. Cool! Exclamation mark. She likes that sort of thing too. And what amazing technology. I'm going to come back to Bradley a bit later, but we didn't fully answer that question. Is the wither height actually a reliable place to measure? So we'll come back to that. And we've also got to cover how we can protect the fitter. And so next we'll have Jochen, who may disappear because he's going straight on to another webinar, so we're going to lose him. So if there's no questions or comments from Bradley, from Bradley or Jochen about David's presentation, then we'll move on to Jochen's part 2.
No, I we're going to be here, so I give myself 2 hours, so there's still 35 minutes left. So
yeah, okay, let's go.
So I stopped by last one with saying where should we measure, and we've seen horses who either been given to clients or come from they bought from a racetrack or come from a place where didn't get enough to eat, and people want to start riding. Despite what the vet or the osteopath or physiotherapist says, they want to ride. And then the problem starts. When a horse is so atrophied behind the shoulder and we saw the movement of the scapular, where are we going to put the saddle? That's the big question, but where should we measure? And if I may use an analogy of 2 runners, one runner has a complete different muscle mass who runs 5,000 miles. The 100-meter runner has completely different muscle. He looks like a bodybuilder. So while they both run, they have completely different muscles. And same with horses. But what we see is that what's published when the horse is normally standing, the thoracic sling is carried by the shoulder and the upper arm with the muscles, the pectoralis and the shoulder muscles. And we want to lift the horse's thoracic sling. We want to get the weight off the forehead. If the rib cage drops, then the horse is in pain, or we call it unfit. And we've seen this a lot. And as a saddle fitter, we get called out and says, okay, I did everything what my physiotherapist I did what the veterinarians say. It's nothing I can do anymore. I want to ride. And you see the horse is really down. So the question for the saddle fitter is, how can I help these horses? And if everything is looked after and the saddle comes up, then we need to also look, the published here from Ann Edmonton in 2016, where she talks about the problem what we sometimes see is lamenesses. Now you put the weight on it. I mean, David's presentation was just phenomenal. Thank you again for showing us this. I saw the first images way back when the horse was on the treadmill, and they said without the rider, there's 9 different back measurements. And this goes back to what Bradley said earlier, with the horse is a little bit uneven. What measurements do we want to take and where? So let's say the saddle fitter comes out and measures the horse. Why? Why do we need to know the measurements? I think we need to take the measurements because we need to have a Polaroid picture. This is what I have here before. And now everybody agrees, okay, let's start. Does the horse change in the shoulder width and in the height? And I refer back to the 2 runners or 2 bodybuilders. When they get measured before workout and after workout. And they pretty much measure the muscle mass of the horse. So when the horse has no collarbone and the whole rib cage hangs off the shoulder blade and the upper arm and various other muscles, of course, these muscles get stronger when the horse gets ridden. We know the term when we measure from here as the tree width. Okay, the angle stays the same of the saddle. Okay, so that is part of the measurements saddle fitter consider. And if you take the measurement with your FlexiCurve or with a laser or with other tools, that's one of indication we can say, okay, you come back. Dr. Joyce Harmon wrote a beautiful book in the early 2000, and she says you can see muscle or skeleton changes after 4 weeks already. So at what stage do you want to do the actual measurements? So we all want the shoulder freedom. There's horses with exceptional movement and certain jumper horses, and certain dressage horses have a big range of motion. Then your happy hacker. And there's all different types of movement and breeds, and we want to make sure the saddle allows that amount of freedom. Different philosophies, but all saddle trees have 3 points. Some are short, some are long, some go backwards, some goes forward. But I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And then we measure behind the horse's shoulder blade. So if the horses lift the rib cage and develops the top line, then of course we see a different shape in your tracing. So in the saddle fitting, we talked about the tree width, and then now we talk about the angle. That would be below your D-ring. There's angle finders you can buy from Amazon for $19, all kinds of tools available, as I said before. And you can then see, does the angle match for the withers? So with the difference to training, and when you speak to a trainer that says, well, I follow Xenophone's philosophy, I got to train the horse first in order to go instantly the high jump or the high dressage or the long distances. The horse needs the proper muscles. So if the horse develops a muscle like a 100-meter runner, gets stronger muscles, depends what sport you are. If you're an endurance runner, you might look like the 5,000-meter runner. If you're jumper or dressage, you might look like the 100-meter runner. So the muscles on the horse definitely change, and you can see it. So how do we, as saddle makers or saddle fitters, accommodate the demand to have horses comfortable and not pinching the withers? That's a term of lots of people hear. This is a cross-section from a drawing from Dr. Joyce Harmon, where she explained pretty much where the gullet plate sits over. And these are all points what your girth, your pad, your saddle tries to avoid, because we see negative reaction if you hit those trigger points. And if you look at saddle tree designs over thousands of years, you see mostly we want to have it on top of the thickest and longest muscle and away from the moving parts. This is a video where you see the horse has no weight on his back, and you can see beside the shoulder blade movement also the different muscles, how they contract. And the question every saddle fitter has, if you put now a saddle on it with a gullet plate, and you measure this horse static on a level ground or non-level ground, and you put the girth on it and the saddle pad, and then the top of the rider, how can we make a saddle so all these movements, all these contraction, elongations of the muscle can properly function? So Bradley already talked about the FlexiCurve, a very desired tool. Unfortunately, it doesn't last long because the lead gets very weak. You need to replace it a lot. But again, they're very inexpensive. Then there are tools. First one I saw come from Italy. They have kind of looks like a chain link in there, rub it in leather, and then you can measure the cross section if you have the transverse axis of the horse by having a level on top. Use a 3D tracer, pretty easy to take. And the nice thing with any of these tools, they're relatively easy to take. And we prefer this tool because we noticed it's very hard, same floor, same area, the horse didn't change. Trace the horse 3 times with this. With that, you always have variances. Here you can get faster, accurate measurements. So we prefer that. And number 5 in the training scale is ride your horse straight. And like David already mentioned, over 70% have a larger left shoulder. This is a tracing or a drawing from a book from the 80s from a farrier. Yes, we can train and make the serratos as even as we possibly can, but sometimes horses have uneven bone structure. If it's in the upper arm or in the transitional vertebrae, this is a very common, this is a lumbar area here, or we see here when we have issues in the ribs. So here we are measuring a horse and says, well, you can't have a saddle because your horse is crooked. Go and get it fixed. Shoeing, training, osteopath, you name it. Sometimes the horse is what it is. I remember I did a Saddle Fit for Life demonstration, and I met a veterinarian. He says, you know, Jochen, I'm a teammate for the 3-day eventing team, and some horses, they are so crooked, I should fail. I should let them not go on. But they are sound, they're crooked, but they're great. So now, if we have a horse and it's been tested, and we're not accommodating in the fitting anywhere with pads, with flocking, with tree, whatever works, the damage we get to sometimes see from horses is, as I said, huge. We're standing in front of the client, says, I need a saddle, I want my saddle fitted. And like Maria said, at what stage do we just walk away? So we see this a lot, so we can say, okay, we ignore the fitting, or we trying to somehow get a big group together. And I think, Caroline, you mentioned that many times. It's an effort of many professionals working together. So Bradley, you said the measurements, we don't want them too accurate. I think we need to get a good Polaroid picture when we start working. And if you use a FlexiCurve and you're really, really good at this and you replace it all the time, great. If you have a laser, great. Whatever tool you desire, I think we need a starting point, because no matter what you did with your training, shoeing, the horse is what it is, has uneven scapulars. And if I continue riding here, you see the saddle constantly, no matter what brand this customer bought, the saddle constantly shifted, no matter how many times they shimmed it and sent the horse away. The customer says, I love this horse, I'm passionate about it, my vet says he's not lame. Can you please, for the love of God, get me straight on this horse? So a couple images here, Russell McGuire, and here from Susan Harris. We see this a lot. And we then, as a rider, trying to get ourselves somehow balanced. Extraordinary, you see this in many, many jumping riders. And the horse is super athletic and somehow makes it over the jump. And for me, it doesn't matter what tools you end up, if it's a laser, if it's a 3D printed tracer, if it's the ARC device, the old trees, and I think this is what I read on David's info, as you're working on a new saddle tree as well. Bradley works on new saddle tree. Mark Todd was actually saying we need to have a new saddle tree. If we all in agreement that the saddle should not sit on the shoulder, nice away from the shoulder blade. We don't want to pinch the spine. We don't want to, the wither cup or the spine. The actual tree surface is just where you see the red and the yellow. The red is where the gullet plate is and your stirrup bar is. And then the yellow is the remaining of the saddle. Coincidental, that's also where you see a lot of white hair. Different flocking, different tree design, double tree, triple tree, all these trees coming out to get more surface area like an army or western saddle has. And the new tree which will be launching in July the 1st, we call it Levitar, and Levitar is Portuguese for levitate. That saddle has the contact here, and that area will be literally the front of the shoulder and here. Doesn't matter if it's a racing saddle, we're making exercise racing saddle, dressage or jumping, literally levitates there without rocking. The good part is, especially for the jumper riders, they have this incredible desire to keep the saddle forward when they jump. So they warm up the horse before they go in the ring, they undo the girth, put the saddle forward again. So you're now able to jump horses without a breastplate because the shoulder has complete freedom, doesn't interfere at all. And like I showed you in my slow motion video, all these muscles will have the freedom to move while the rider sits far forward. I think templating is absolutely important. As I said, it's Polaroid picture when the saddle fit is there, just like Bradley says, who we're fitting to the manufacturer, to the owner, to the saddle fitter. There's proper templating provides the guidelines to the saddle fitters and shows the client the positive or negative changes to the horse's three-dimensional shape. Full stop. That's what it is. All of these factors change the three-dimensional shape. And if we properly get a Polaroid picture, I like to call it, or a template, then I think that's a good starting point for all these professionals to work on the horse. And in the end of the day, hopefully, you have a saddle fitter who has the ability to take all this data and his skill to fit the saddle, no matter what saddle it is, to protect the horse for long-term damage. So thank you very much for listening, and I always welcome the question. And yeah.
Thank you for that, Jochen. This is lots of rabbit holes we can go down here. No more questions from the audience, except to go back to a question which was for Bradley. Is with a height actually a reliable place to measure, considering how much a horse can lift and lower the thorax between the scapulae? And I'll add a little bit to that myself. I'm thinking of fatigue, the effects of fatigue on the thoracic sling musculature.
Yep. So you've got to bear in mind is what I showed you is not all of the measurements we take. That was just a sneak peek of the measurements we take. We take what we call static measurements and dynamic measurements. So what we're looking at is we're building up ranges of variation and ranges of movement. Things like wither position. So for example, the wither height, we take that into consideration. And then what we do is we then obviously do rib cage circumference, we do various other things as well, and like a thoracic lift, for example, to work out the range of movement of the horse's back. And then what we do is we actually build in tolerances. And this is where I was going back, is that you can be as accurate as you want, but the difficulty is with greater accuracy of measuring inherently then brings in greater accuracy of products. So what we're trying to do is go, right, we want accuracy in terms of measuring, But also, like what David's shown, is obviously the dynamic movement of the horse's back is quite large. So you also then have to build in certain tolerances of the product line to cope with those variations. And that's the reasons why we have a two-part saddle. You know, we have the equine tree, which is more flexible, deliberately designed to allow for example, rib cage expansion. You know, as long as you've got the horse's back coming up in the longitudinal line, you also have got to allow for lateral expansion of the rib cage, which then in turn has a knock-on effect in terms of the rider's positioning, because they will be knocked forward. If you take measurements, and this is, as I say, from my perspective, if you take measurements, you can then calculate from it. If you have repetitive measurements, you can then see trends. And if you can allow for trends, and you can allow and understand the seasonal changes of the horse, variations, longitudinal length, you know, muscle density, that's always a good one when it comes to kind of panel pressure and various things like that. You can basically factor all of those things in, and it builds up over a long period of time, generally over about a year to kind of 18 months, that you can then start building in these variances and these tolerances within your product and product line. That's what we've done. That's why we've spent so long kind of coming to the market and then going, hang on, our product isn't good enough. So actually we need to step back and then come back and go, right, well, now we're going to come back again, because actually we've gone away and done a hell of a lot more, because we need to be better. Everything needs to be better. So yeah, to answer Dorothy's question, something like a thoracic lift does give you an indication, but also you can then over time build in greater and greater degrees of variance. So that's the whole point. Saddlery and saddle fitting should be an evolutionary process. It shouldn't just be measuring. And this is the fundamental problem, is a lot of people look at measuring, they look at the scanning technology and the mathematics and everything like that, and they see it as a fixed unit. And that's to do with psychology, that's to do with our understanding and our inherent education of how we look at mathematics, when actually we need to look at mathematics more as a dynamic element to it. It's a dynamic addition to saddle fitting. It is not a static addition to saddle fitting. And this is the problem. A lot of the research always kind of focuses, and Jochen and David and everybody has always kind of said, you know, that's your kind of Polaroid picture. And until we can kind of build up lots of Polaroid pictures, which is what Jochen's been doing and David's been doing, is building up these Polaroid pictures, and then what you do is you can then basically see these trends over long periods of time. Or you can go completely hell for leather and you can build the tech into a saddle, which is mind-blowingly in some regards quite simplistic, but it's the whole the actual hardware is very simple to do. The actual software is amazingly complex, because that's when you can have all the sensors built into the saddle to do all of the real-time data analysis. Again, it always comes down to the most simplistic thing: are you actually going to use it? And all of that data collection over long periods of time. It's going to be great for a scientist, but it's not going to be great for real-time people using it. You know, most people look at data and analysis and just turn around and go, no, I don't want to do that. Just let me go and ride my pony. So, yeah. So, but yeah, that's to answer Dorothy's question.
Yes, and she says, thank you, that makes sense. I just want to mention here, but there's a whole summit about this. I need to mention that Jochen's measurements and his saddle designs allow for the scapula to pass under the tree points, yep. Whereas English saddle design is that the scapula avoids the tree points. So yep. It's quite a big distinction, and it opens questions such as, well, how long do the tree points need to be? But obviously we've been moving towards, with these summits, doing saddle construction and design, but there seems to be so many more rabbit holes to investigate first. So I just wanted to put that in there, that we don't always measure just behind the withers.
No, so the thing is the whole difficulty is like what Jochen says. He measures slightly differently. That doesn't mean it's right to mean it's wrong. And this is the fundamental problem: is every company builds their products made to their specific indications and what their thing is. That inherently brings about problems and differences in interpretation, which then positions the fitter in a very difficult position, because they have to then pick and choose different products to work for different horses. As I said, that's why I end up talking about legislation and protection. You know, it's fundamentally quite simple. If you turn around and go, there's minimum forces applied to a horse's back, that's a safety predication for the industry. Whatever, you know, 2 pounds of pressure, 3 pounds of pressure, whatever you want of pressure, I don't care. But if you have that as a universal standard, all of a sudden everybody has to abide by that. That's like an NCAP safety rating in cars.
But then the rider often comes along and puts the saddle further forward than it was meant to be fitted, which is a massive problem.
But that's also where manufacturers have to build in tolerances within their product line. So, for example, like Jochen, he has designed a very clever product which goes over the horse's shoulder and allows for ranges of movement. We have done something quite similar, but through very different means and kind of mediums. We use a sprung steel gullet bar. So there is a degree of flex, there is a degree of movement. We also then come back and we go, well, we measure slightly differently. And this is the problem, is if there is no legislation, doesn't mean anybody's wrong at all. It means we're all right, but we kind of all we're kind of getting to a stage now where the industry is starting to kind of argue within itself, and it's starting to become quite territorial. So the difficulty is the industry just needs a little bit of a boundary, just to kind of go, right, we don't care what you do in terms of what theories and kind of ideas you come from, but actually just the horse's welfare comes priority. This is the minimum standards of protection we want for the horse. We don't care if you want it to be 16 layers of saddles or whatever, but just keep this legislation protect for the horse.
May I say something, Bradley?
Yeah, by all means.
So if we all agree that the horse is, we kind of know where the vertebrae is. We all know that the top of the rib cage is rather downhill before it's really level or uphill. Basically how the rib cage is in the body of the horse. And if we look at the horse from the top, there was a great image, David, you showed. You know, the horse looks from the top like a pear, wide here and it goes narrow there. And every saddle tree, not your two you guys work on, the common saddle trees, they have 3 points. And when we got to think about how do I engage the horse? I got to do lateral work. And how do I win classes when I ride dressage? I've got to do transitions. So there is the saddle wants to slide forward. There is the girth, will always go to the smallest areas. And if you put a string around a pear and make that string tight, where do you think that string wants to go? To the narrow spot of the pear. So saddle designs in the past and still to this day have 3 points. Okay, these points will look for the edge of the shoulder blade. So I'm not arguing your measurement, the English measurement, mine, just to correct you, we don't build saddles, Bradley, what's this, over the shoulder?
Yeah. I was paraphrasing, but
that's not what we do. But
right, you know,
we have forces to consider.
Yeah.
Right, and saddles want to go forward. The trick of the trade, and this is, I think, what is eye-opening to see when we got it so accurate with scan and we see the movement where the muscles go. And I have a question to David quick. Did you see in your research that the rib cage expands, David? And there's images, because I couldn't see it.
This is a really interesting one. Horses, particularly because of the shoulder doesn't have any bony attachment, the horse stiffens its thorax to stabilize the forelimbs. And what we see, if we measure, we've done this in other studies, if we actually measure the shape of the chest while the horse is in different gaits, horses actually end up with what's called paradoxic motion. So when they breathe in, you would expect the rib cage to come out. Actually, the rib cage dips in a little bit. And when they breathe out, you would expect the rib cage to go the other way. It doesn't. So the rib cage moves opposite to the way it should. And that is because the horse is stabilized in the thorax. So there isn't a lot of rib expansion as such. The only time you really see rib expansion is when horses are blowing hard after exercise.
Yep.
That's
and also when horses are jumping over fences.
Yeah.
Which is, and also just before you put the saddle on for a lot of them.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, we've run 24 minutes over time. We've still got Bradley to do psychology and finish his talk. And I'd also like to just spin through some ways of protecting the saddle fitter from these types of issues. I have a few suggestions. So I'll say thank you very much to Jochen in case you're whisked away to your next webinar. You've been absolutely phenomenal, and this has been absolutely fascinating. And the same to you, David, absolutely phenomenal. But if we don't mind carrying on, Bradley, then I'll hand over to you.
Yeah. So just quickly caveat to what David said about the rib expansion. When I talk about rib expansion, I'm looking at it from the perspective of jumping, because I'm an ex-show jumper, which is always quite good fun. So yeah, right. So how do we learn when it comes to saddle fitters? The biggest problem is obviously we talk about all these materials, all these sciences, and various things like that. The difficulty is we are looking and we are starting to apply a lot of science and a lot of these tools to fitters, and we're creating more and more demands upon the fitter, and we're not really turning around and going, right, the industry, the manufacturers, or the customers. That's where Jochen's really good, because I know what he does is turn around to the customer and go, right, you take a scan of the horse's back. And that then puts a greater emphasis onto the customer, which is great. The difficulty is in the fitters, we keep wanting to add more to them, more work to them, more interpretation. You do the scanning, you do this, you do that. It's your responsibility. It's all of it. So the problem is as I've kind of said, who are we fitting for? Is it a manufacturer? Is it a customer? Is it a rehabilitation case? Is it a legal case? So on and so forth. The other difficulty is people in an ideal situation would take on any new bit of information, i.e. scanners and various things like that, and they would immediately change their mind to introduction of new data. The problem is we're all human. And we don't like being wrong. So we apply our personal experience, we apply our expertise, all from a subjective perspective. We don't apply it from an objective perspective. So the problem is, let me just do this.
Oh, sorry. Here we go.
There we go. So as I said, what we would like to do is assimilate information immediately and uniformly. We don't generally do that. We apply our own personal experiences and expertise, subjectivity, to the situation. Now, generally speaking, as we all know, the equestrian saddle fitting industry is quite territorial, and people like to hammer their knowledge or their expertise or their kind of ribbon to a certain mast, and it becomes very difficult to try and change their mind, because we're human. We like to not be wrong. We feel threatened. We don't want to do that. So it takes a huge amount of kind of ego reduction to turn around and stick your hand up and go, actually, you know what, I'm wrong. I thought I was right, and I'm really, really sorry. So when you're introducing new products or new kind of ideas, because you've got to kind of introduce the use of scanners, not only to the saddle fitters, but also to the industry, to the manufacturers. You've got to have manufacturers which are willing to turn around and go, right, they've got to accept that they're not right and that there's new data involved. Now, the other thing we have is also selective learning. Now, this is a well-known phenomenon in terms of confirmational bias, that we as individuals, we obtain knowledge, but we also exclude. Now, we see this quite often with new products coming out. And I know about 2 products which have come out in the last 5-10 years, which are fundamentally very, very good. They have very good principles. But the problem is the way they're fitted is very much procedural. It has to be done a certain way. Now, a lot of the fitters, they've been doing it for 10, 20, 30 odd years. They have a huge amount of experience. Now, what happens is the fitter looks at the procedure and then selects and chooses what part of the procedure they will follow and what part they will ignore, because they don't see it as relevant for their particular case. The difficulty is that particular element is very important for the manufacturer, but the fitter doesn't understand that, or they don't really pay attention to it because they only want the newest information. So you then have a situation where products are going to fail. Almost immediately, you're doomed to failure. And also then that means that the fitter is doomed to failure. You also then have these other biases, which is primacy effect bias. Basically, we just take on the first bit of information and then we kind of ignore the rest of it, which is fundamentally the reasons why first impressions count. After that, we all kind of lose a bit of interest. So if you're coming out with a new product, or you're coming out to do a fitting or anything like that, if you're not changing or having an effect upon a customer almost immediately, the customer has expectations of what their product is going to do, left, right, and center. And then there's also cognitive bias, which is, and this is something not only for fitters but also for riders. And please don't take this the wrong way, but people generally, they kind of overestimate their ability. So you have this element where, for example, a rider may turn around and go, yeah, I can rehab a horse, or I can do this, that, and the other. And actually they can't, which then puts the fitter in a very difficult position, because they're trying to fit a product with a customer which believes that they're able to do the job, but they can't actually do the job. In which case, then the horse is not improving, and all of a sudden, hey ho, what's going to get blamed? The product. And you suddenly sit there and go, the poor saddle fitter is stuck in this scenario, in this situation of they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. So you're at a bit of an impasse for the entire industry, of how do you go forward? How do we work? How do we, as product manufacturers, kind of fitters, and industry kind of leaders who want to change the industry, we have to apply. It's no great thing to just keep doing science and trying to bash people over the head with science and kind of all of this. You've actually got to kind of get underneath the skin of customers, fitters, and various things like that, in a good way, to actually go, look, let's objectively look at this. This isn't saying that you were wrong. It's just that things have changed, and that, look at it from a slightly different perspective. But that comes down to the individual and how they're willing to learn or take on information. So from my perspective, in conclusion, we can easily successfully employ modern and more accurate technologies. But we've got to, at first, address the inconsistencies and the irregularities of current fitting. We want industry-wide objectivity, But the problem is that currently at the moment, it leaves us open to misinterpretation and misinformation. So the problem is that you have all of these things that then will lead, if a product is misinformed or misinterpreted, you will get an inferior product, and that will end up creating a bigger problem. But that will ultimately affect our customers, welfare of the horse, and the entire industry. My view is that as an osteopath, I am a very holistic practitioner. I look at a lot of things. But fundamentally, in this situation, we need to build in tolerances to our products to allow for variations. As I said, like Jochen, he's got a product which is very, very flexible over the shoulder line. We've kind of addressed it in a slightly different way. But there's a huge amount to do, and we can do it, but the industry is going to substantially change in the next decade, and we know that. The difficulty is that everyone's going to be asking the same question, which is always, where is the industry going to go in the next 10 years or the next 20 years? And that's fundamentally the wrong question. We are asking the wrong question there. Where are we going to go? Is you're trying to look at a crystal ball. You sit there and go, no, right. What is a better question is actually going, what's not going to change in the next 10 years and the next 20 years? If you have advances in industry and you have advances in science and you have advances in knowledge and understanding, what are the things which are not going to change? What are your consistencies? That is the more important question, rather than kind of going, well, okay, what's going to happen in the future? So yeah, that's where we look at it from, is not going, well, what's going to happen in the future? That's irrelevant. What's actually not going to change? Horses are not going to change. Riders are not going to change. They're the consistent things. And how do you make products better? That's it fundamentally. So, but yeah.
So from all of this, I just take that there is a lot of fragmentation between the horse, the saddle, and the rider, and where is the overlap? How much should each different practitioner know? And also, I see us having to make the rider more accountable for the way they load that horse, because we can improve saddles hugely, and we will, but surely the biggest win comes from taking the rider and conditioning them, fitting them, whatever, their posture, and to load the horse as optimally as they can. The other thing just to quickly touch on is just a comment while we've still got Jochen. How would you protect the saddle fitter? What do they need to know to be doing? The app.
That's my count. No, that's my countdown time. So if I'm just middle of the sentence go, this is where my screen shuts off.
Yes, okay. I'm trying.
I promise them that I'll be there on time this time.
Yes.
So I apologize in advance in case I'm going out of it.
Yeah.
So your direct answer is get information, document what you see. There's an old saying, no hoof, no horse. Look at the hoof, take pictures, as many as you can, and then document on that day, if you're a saddle fitter, that the information you got from the customer is the truth. Do a tracing with whatever tool you use, and then get the customer to sign it and give it to this customer. Give him right there and then a copy. I'm unbelievable astounded when I get into our Saddle Fit for Life Academy, fitters who went to other saddle fitting school. No, we don't leave them any copies. Why not? This is something, what is right there, that's what you saw. That's what I mean, Bradley, with her Polaroid picture. That's what I saw that day. And even there, we both says, okay, I come back in 4 weeks when you talk to your farrier or your physio or your chiropractor or your osteopath, right? And very often the misunderstanding, one of the most effective courses I've ever been on was from Brian Tracy, The Psychology of Selling. We all sell something. You know, when I was a trainer, or when I sell a saddle or fitting, we all sell something. And understand the people, it's huge. It's really important. So back to what I said earlier, if you take every existing saddle tree there and chop off the tree points. This is a saddle tree. This is a very short tree point. Here's a saddle tree from a manufacturer who believes to make the tree points very far forward. And you have, as a customer, the option of changing this bar. This changes, the gullet plate is not attached there. So if you have an extremely back left shoulder, you can open it here. So you, as the customer, have the choice. I mean, there is so many manufacturers who make different saddle trees. Okay, some go backwards, some go forward. You said, how short should they be? One test, make a saddle and chop this off. Where do you think that saddle will end up? Back to my story with the little thread around the pair. So the only thing that holds the saddle in place will be the girth on the armpit. And there has been a lot of design. You know, David, you said you worked with Mark Fisher. I mean, he spent a lot of time on girth design. So to protect yourself as a saddle fitter, definitely record what you saw, get the signature from a customer that they said what the information they have given to you at that day, it's true. From the 100, let's say you have 100 customers, there might be one underneath them who will not sign. Well, then you know who you're dealing with. I am so excited to see the new tree from Bradley and the new tree from David, also our new tree. We're making these new trees because we like to waste money and time? No, because we need to utilize the information what scientists such as Dr. David Marlin here and of course Bradley have done either through science, through experience, to seeing come from a holistic field. That's what I love. Imagine we would still run around in caves with a burning torch. You know, we're advanced, and why can we not take the technology we have today and use these templates as a starting gate? And next time you go back to the horse, he says, okay, you said you improved your horse. Let's see how he is in the range. Okay. If they're very accurate, you can't go there. Okay, here, look, 1/16th of an inch difference. Obviously, that makes no sense because we saw how much the horse changes. And we saw how much the horse's back changes with this phenomenal work, David, you're doing there. It's just like, I was fascinated how accurate we can measure that now. But let's forget, they have a couple more things to remember. There's no saddle on and no rider. What type of muscles, how does the whole body function under the load of a rider? And then on top, how good is the rider? Is it a poker stick who goes bang, 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 bang? Or is this a rider who is actually, I mean, that's a new topic, and this is where your shine, David. I'm sorry, Bradley, from a human osteopath to understand how the body has to function. Dr. Miners, who taught at the University of Lüneburg, then was heavy involved in the German Olympic Training Center and teaches all the professional riders how a human body actually can function on an animal without being crippled. So if we understand, let's start with the professional trainers, this is how the body has to function. Now goes the interface, the saddle, give the ability to give that person the function. Then what they always say in Vienna, if it doesn't fit the rider, it will never fit the horse. Full stop. And the industry will be enriched by the saddle tree, what David is doing, Bradley, where we come out, because there is a choice. At the end of the day, this is the beautiful part.
And I think what the big elephant in the room as well, without going on too long, is that the horse needs to be warmed up before the templates are taken, possibly, unless you note. I think a lot of this is what you were saying, Jochen, is the more information that the saddle fitter can get, no matter how irrelevant it may seem, but the more history taking. Was the horse warmed up? Was it not warmed up when I took these templates? That kind of thing. So the more
That's up to
information,
every individual, you know, we make it a big point. Do not warm your horse up. We want the horse cooked, because I don't know. Last time I warmed them up 5 minutes. Now I woke them up 10 minutes. Oh, this time my trainer, who's much stronger than you are, was heavier. Now it's a different shape.
right?
If you get checked in the club because you're doing bodybuilding, when you think they measure you before you start pumping the eye, right? So you get what we call the cold body first. But that is up to each individual fitter. You can say, make sure you're ridden half an hour until I come to your place.
Yeah.
So long you keep it consistent.
Be specific. Okay. And also that they should identify the horse fully that they are fitting to, because the riders may use the saddle on lots of different horses. And yeah, definitely this all comes back to checking fit, so that the fitter must encourage their clients. Look, you know, these are the reasons that you need to have me back in 3 months, 6 months. I just think a year is possibly too long, but to have this culture of checking, then any of these anomalies can be put right before they become a problem.
Can I add one more thing to the question you said? How do you protect the fitter?
Yeah.
I have seen it. I just drove in the yard, and I'm packing my barn and my table, and there comes the ambulance. And said, "Oh, what happened? Oh, somebody fell off the horse." So there was another company, no names, fitter. So the fitter went in and says, yeah, I know what to do. I fit the saddle. The customer rode, the horse spooked, the customer fell off, broke the neck, fall against the wall, dead on the spot. So imagine you're the fitter. You touch the saddle, you adjust the saddle. Now the family's after you because you just killed the rider. My advice to you is, this is so dangerous with horses. Always launch the horse first, see if it's sound. Then see them how they ride before you even touch the saddle, before you even open the mouth. Do your template first before you warm up. Watch them ride. What are you dealing with? Don't even touch the saddle so that you might be the person. So if you want to protect yourself, assess the situation. How safe is the rider? How safe is the horse? What's going on? Because in the end of the day, we don't want to have that saddle fit in the cross tie or in the barn or in the wash dry. The saddle has to fit in motion, period. So now I can talk to the customer. And I always have a form, and on the back of the form, I have a release form, because I don't know how it's in England, but in the United States, I live in Canada, but in the United States, they love suing everybody left, right, center. So if you are a fitter, you want to protect yourself, check the situation first before you touch the saddle and get a release form.
Brilliant advice there. Thank you very much, Jochen. We're really getting into the nitty-gritty of this now, but we've got to go home. David, what would you like to add to this discussion, to these points?
I think it's really interesting. Every time I listen to people talk about saddles, I pick up different things, and it suggests, when there are so many different ways, it suggests to me it's probably quite complex what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
There's more than one way to achieve it. I mean, one of the things that we did last year is we decided to build a rig to test saddles all under the same conditions. It's a mechanical rig based on a 3D scan of a horseback, and we thought this was going to be pretty easy. This is something Lars Rupstuff and I did, and it's really tough standardizing things when you have different saddles, different as we've been talking about, girth positions, different shapes of horses, different asymmetries of riders, flocked versus wool. There's so many variations, and that's why I actually I really do appreciate the skill of saddle fitters, because faced with different saddles, different horses, different riders, different gaits, jumping and getting a saddle to do a job is a real skill. And I don't is it 70% art, 80% art, 20% science? I don't know, but it's definitely an art. And I think, as I say, every time I hear discussions, I just think, oh, I hadn't thought of that. So I'm always learning.
David, can I add something to your research with the shoulder? My old master always said to me, when you go on the horse, it is your duty to make sure that the horse can carry you. You need to shorten the horse. That's a term often used. You need to engage the back. And when you watch a horse on the lunge line, you look at the footprint, right? So you see if the back hoof goes over the front hoof. Your job is to engage the leg and the movement of the horse to reach it more, right? You're not sitting on there like a happy hacker, nothing against happy hacker, but any weight on the animal, if you're happy hacker or Olympian rider, your job, that was drilled into me, is to engage the movement of the horse. So in other words, it would be really cool, because I did see that study in Holland and Utrecht once, where they had a rider on the horse. So next time you do a research, maybe you can put a rider there as well. And somehow, I wouldn't even know where to begin. That's your field. Somehow you can see with a good rider, can he get that horses to reach more? Look at dressage horses when they do their extended trot, right? So obviously there, the range of shoulder motion is much bigger. Think about jumpers. Both shoulders come back. So that is why, for me, measuring, and I'm nothing against English fitting, please don't take that the wrong way, Caroline. But for me, just going that far back, my horse has way more movement, because that's my job. I gotta get a positive tension. I gotta get the back up haunches underneath to get the freedom in the front. So that's why I'm excited to look at the new designs. And like you said, Bradley, so many new saddles that come out in the last 5 years. People thinking. So if you can manage that somehow to make that images with the rider on top, with all the calculation, that would be massive. That would be huge.
Challenging.
Yeah.
We're getting there. Baby steps, as they say. Bradley, talking about babies.
Yeah.
You can have the last word.
Oh dear God, no, don't do that to me. I can't really add much. Jesus, we've kind of covered quite a lot. As I said, we all know that there's difficulties within the industry. It's having summits like this where you pull in kind of people from different kind of areas and fields and everything like that, which is what you want. We now are in a situation where we need to have cross communication between everybody. I'm also, like David, I'm interested in exercise physiology as well, but that's because of my history and my expertise and various things like that, doing that in the past. When you apply that, the aspect of exercise physiology with saddlery, that is the next level and the next kind of type of complication which you've got to add in. Jochen, and everybody knows me as more of a physics and then a maths and an engineering guy, but I'm actually not. That's the hilarious part. I'm an idiot with a stick, basically, as I describe myself. Kind of self-flagellating myself to make myself work and understand. So the next part is kind of really applying it to exercise physiology in terms of training methodologies, hypertrophy, muscle densities, muscle tones, so on and so forth, and how that impacts saddlery, and various material science and various things like that. I know what we're doing, which is with the next phase for our kind of thing is looking at material science and looking at actually reasons why are we using leather, why are we kind of doing, we change the structure of a tree, but yet we still put essentially about 4 or 5 pounds worth of leather on top of it, when actually there's way more materials which are way better than that. And Jochen has done it. I know Jochen, because he's a nerd. He's like myself. He would have done loads of research on material science and really kind of ripped the book apart in terms of that. But this is only the beginning. Really is, and this is the real infancy of a subtle explosion and a subtle industry change. What we need to do is really kind of combine and group our group knowledge and have a huge amount of respect for each of our approaches. It's none of us are wrong, but we're all trying to solve the same problem in a variety of different ways. And that's what we need. We need that kind of group communication, because ultimately at the end of the day, horses lose. If we don't do this, if we don't facilitate change, if we don't protect kind of the horse, then nobody else will. And that's our duty. And that's the way I see my duty, is that I'm an idiot with a stick, and I've come with an idea and a principle and an approach. And Jesus Christ, I'm going to try my bloody hardest to make sure that the horse and the rider are protected. Sod me. If I fail, it's not about me. This isn't my ego. This isn't, and that's the way we need to approach it as an industry. We're not individuals, because at the end of the day, we got to do this for horses. They've had a raw deal for so long. We're here. We're custodians, as Jochen has said. We are custodians of that horse, and we've got to take that to heart, and we've really got to own it.
So I have to say, go now.
Yeah.
We've done it 2 seconds. David, thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you. I'm absolutely amazed of your work. So keep it up. And Bradley, as usual, I learned so much from you, and I can't wait to meet you guys again. Caroline, thank you very much for this wonderful work. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
See you soon.
Caroline, that is me as well, because I actually do have another call at night.
Sorry.
No, not at all. It's been great fun.
Thank you
so much for inviting me. And the answer to the question about jumping, we do have jumping back motion as well. It's just that we haven't finished analysing the data.
Yeah. Oh, we'll bring you back for that. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna, thanks 2 million.
Lovely to meet you, Bradley.
All right, lovely to meet you.
Thanks, Caroline. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. So we're just going to couple of questions here just to finish off. We've lost Jochen, but Maria Howring, Ergo2X, asks, so should the tree open up? Oh, sorry, lost it. Should the tree open up in the front to allow shoulder according to the data? That's something we're going to answer when we get more onto saddle design and construction. Personally, it makes sense to open the shoulder, and that is part of Jochen's design, as I understand it. If you put place the points so that the scapula can pass under, there has to be a certain amount of flare in the front. Yes. But we'll ask him next time.
The other thing is in terms of that, if you flare a front end, you've also got to remember is that you're making the contact surface smaller. Because in order to have that flare, that means that it's not in constant contact with the shoulder blade. So you've inadvertently opened it up to the shoulder, which is fantastic. But then the catch-22, and this is always what you're playing with, is you've now slightly reduced it by a small percentage. Not very many. Usually, kind of about 6 or 8%. You've shrunk it. But that 6 or 8% then has to be taken up onto a smaller surface area, which increases kind of pressures. So you're playing around, and that that's where material science and understanding comes into it, and there are various reasons for that.
Okay, couple of seconds. What I would like to say to that is that if you can allow the horse's back to function better, then it may be stronger to take that reduction in it.
That's always the problem is if you're flaring any kind of saddle, you know, if you're making it wider or anything like that, you're always, you see how these saddles are more scalloped at the front and more curved. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the fundamental point, is that there is nothing wrong with it, but there are other caveats which have to occur with that. So that's why, you know, there's no right or wrong answer. There is no perfect product. There is nothing like that. It is utilizing the best product at the time for that particular case, which is why products then also have to evolve and they have to change. So this is where we've kind of got to get out the mindset of a fixed product, i.e. this is a tree, this is a saddle which works. It's like, no, this is a tree, this is a saddle that is dynamic, and it is going through a dynamic growth process with alongside your horse, not a static product and that is it. So it's a very different concept. So.
Okay, another comment, super interesting. Thank you. Teamwork makes the dream work. We are delivering the education to horse owners today. It's a challenge for sure. And Maria says, we need to combine the research world with the fitters more. Yes. Another comment, how do we drag Walsall out of the dark ages?
So the thing is you're going to hear something a little bit weird from me. I'm quite protectionist over the industry. I know I sound like I'm kind of battering it. I'm not. I desperately want the industry to evolve. You know, anybody who watches me and they actually listen, you know, Walsall is the home of saddle making. It really is. And the difficulty is that we in Britain, and I'm only going to talk about it from a British perspective, we are the pinnacle, or we were the pinnacle. We have now lost that. Because we have an exceptional amount of knowledge and expertise in the field, and we've kind of got a little bit lazy as a culture in terms of saddlery. And we're a culture and an industry, and the English mentality is we are innovators, we are clever, we are engineers. We have had, for such a small island, we have had a massive impact upon the world. And that is in our blood. And the difficulty is we really need to kind of get the fire cooking underneath Walsall, and going, right, come on, you can do better. You know, it's very much that, you know, they are better. They are phenomenal. When they actually work, they're brilliant individuals. The difficulty is that they inherently, they just want to make products. They want an easy life. In some regards, I kind of jealous of them, because they just want to do a product. They want to do it well, and they want to do it consistently. And the difficulty is when you're challenging, when you're trying to create new things and all of that, you're pushing the boundaries, and you're saying things are not good enough.
I think at the end of the day as well, they are making a safe product.
Exactly.
And quality of workmanship.
And that's the thing, is that they as a powerhouse, they're making very safe products. They're doing consistent work. The thing is that really, in my view, they should be kind of segregating some of their time and kind of really encouraging a lot of R&D and actually pushing that as an industry. Because otherwise, we, as a culture and a country, we're going to lose, and I really don't want that. I certainly want, like, British saddlery to be right up the top, you know, real kind of pushing the boundaries, and it doesn't matter if it fails. It doesn't, because it means that you're thinking differently and you're actually achieving. You know, there is no loss in this. You win. Everybody wins. But it means that kind of group mentality is we're all winning here, because ultimately the horse wins and the customer wins. Because that's what we want. You know, we see this in other industries. Formula One spends a huge amount of time doing R&D. But we as common car drivers, we get all the benefit, cruise control, you know, kind of instant ignition, all of these types of things. That's what we need for the industry. It is going to come. It is.
It will get there. Another comment, excellent evening. Some great advice from Jochen went out with customers. Yes, definitely. And absolutely amazing summit. Thank you very much to all presenters. So much to think about too. And thank you all. And Jochen's points are not flared. They are more vertical but further apart. Then the panel fills in the gap, yes, and may have a cutaway at the front for shoulder relief. Also, the points angle backwards. Thank you for that. Thank you for that correction. So I guess I have to leave you all. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention for the past 2.5 hours. We could have gone on a bit longer, but there's young babies to sort out, Bradley.
Yes.
And yes, he's been very good to.
Oh yeah, well that's my wife. So yeah, just
yeah. Yes, thank you very much to Mrs. Bradley Whale for holding the fort.
Oh,
so we'll see you all again soon, hopefully, as we continue on our summit journey to pick out the best of the industry and evolve it. And another thank you. Okay, thank you very much and good night.